Good morning, everybody. We are now in our fourth week here on this sermon series called First Things First. It has been about choosing to live a life that is focused on giving our best to the things that matter most. That's the big idea of the whole series, giving our best to the things that matter most. So putting first things first is about embracing a life of commitment to God's kingdom and God's righteousness. Those are His priorities. It's embracing what He's doing and how He's doing it, basically. And here's what we have learned so far, either to bring you up to speed because you haven't been here or just to refresh your memory as we keep moving forward here. So this series is based on a key Bible passage about priorities, Matthew chapter 6, verses 25 through 34. And verses 33 and 34, which are right at the heart of this passage, say this. This is Jesus speaking. He says, "Seek first His kingdom and His righteousness, and all these things will be given to you as well. Therefore, do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about itself. Each day has enough trouble of its own." And I haven't talked much about this yet, but let me just say that we find this particular passage, these few verses, right in the middle of what's known as Jesus' Sermon on the Mount, which is in Matthew chapters 5 through 7. And in these three chapters, Jesus basically is introducing a whole new way of living. He uses the phrase, "You have heard it said, but I say to you," many different times. Basically, as a way of saying, look, I know what the norm is, but this is the life that God is calling you to. And this passage is right in the middle of that sermon that he's giving, where he's saying, look, I know the normal thing is to strive after all of these things in life, what you're gonna eat, what you're gonna wear, where you're gonna live, how you're gonna care for all of your needs. I know that that's the norm, but I'm telling you, instead of doing that, seek first God's kingdom and His righteousness, and He'll take care of all that stuff. If we will make God's priorities our priorities, He will take care of everything else. And if we refuse to allow our worries about secondary things to overpower our attention to God's priorities, then we will experience God taking care of our lives' details, and in the process we'll discover how meaningful and how impactful our lives can actually be. So this sort of living doesn't just come naturally to us. It requires focus. It requires focus. We can't just sort of haphazardly wander through life and expect to stumble upon the best things. They must be sought after and then chosen. Now, many of us, myself included, have a problem giving God our foremost attention and choosing the best things because we're often worried about missing out on the secondary things, right? Well, if I choose this, what about all that other stuff? So instead of choosing what's best, we try to do everything. And the result is that we're busy, for sure, and we might even be productive, but our lives don't accomplish as much as they could if we would just embrace God's priorities. So what are His priorities? That's where we took the sermon series next. We talked about the importance of focusing. Well, then what are the first things we should keep first? These are the things that advance God's kingdom and promote His righteousness. And 2 weeks ago, we looked at the first one of these things, which is love. Love. We read how everything that God has called us to do hinges on our love for God and our love for our neighbors. We read of the dangers of trying to substitute even spiritual activity for love. And we read how anything that we do without love, no matter how noble, how selfless, or how spiritual it seems, if we do it without love, it is just loud noise, a banging gong, or a resounding cymbal. And then last week, we studied a couple of passages on the importance of keeping prayer a priority. Because our lives are so hectic, we are actually too busy not to pray. So to keep prayer one of the things of first importance in our lives, we have to give it the time, we have to give it the attention that it deserves. We need to pray because it refills us, it keeps us aligned with God's promises. And when we pray, we ought to pray that all people would come to know the Lord. And one of the passages that we looked at last week reminded us that first of all, to pray for those who are in authority over us, to pray for our leaders, and to pray for them in such a way that they would come to know the Lord or come to know the truth, because God wants everyone to be saved. So focus, love, and prayer, these all make sense for us as first things as Christians. But this next first thing that I want to talk to you about today is particularly counterintuitive because it is so countercultural. It just is so against the grain. First, we must rest. Most of us consider rest not the first thing, but the last thing, right? Rest comes when the work is finished, right? We earn rest by getting all of our stuff done, right? Well, sure, that's the norm again, but remember, Jesus is teaching us a new way of living. The biblical perspective here is different, that we don't rest when everything is done. We don't work hard so that when everything is done, we can rest. The biblical approach to rest is to work from your rest, not to your rest. We start with rest. It should be our starting point from which all of our activity proceeds. It's not a reward on the other side of the finish line when we're all done. This is such an important and such a neglected biblical principle in the lives of Christians today. So first, we rest. From a biblical standpoint, here's what this means, okay? It means we must stop. And that is so hard. And not only should we just stop, but we need to learn how to stop right smack dab in the middle of it all, even when it's not all done. The rest that God prescribes us is an intervention. It's an intervention. It's designed to interfere. It's designed to intrude upon us and get our attention. That's on purpose. It's God stepping in to rescue us from our addiction to many things, but above all, our addiction to control. It's a rescue. Though we often see rest as an intrusion, truly, it is salvation. It's a rescue. It's a liberation. It's being set free. Well, I hope that this sounds nice. I'm guessing that you're listening to this going, boy, that would be great. That sounds nice. So why is it so hard to choose it? I think that's a fair question. If God's saying, hey, look, I want to help you out. I want you to stop and I want you to refuel and replenish. Why is it so hard to do it? Well, maybe it's not hard for you. It's hard for me. This is something that God's been teaching me for years, and I'm still not very good at it. Well, the first reason it's hard to stop is because we are addicted to busyness. As individuals, as a culture, we I don't know if I want to say we enjoy being busy, but we can't imagine the thought of not being busy. We can't imagine if somebody asks us how our life is going and we say, well, actually, it's just pretty chill right now. I don't have a lot going on. I'm really moving slowly, and things are really not all that busy. I think we're afraid of being judged if we answer like that. So we're addicted to busyness. Through staying constantly engaged, we believe that we're able to maintain control of our lives. We have to keep all the plates spinning, right? Keep all the balls in the air as we're juggling things. It all depends on us. We have to maintain control of our lives. Sometimes we have to maintain control of others. Others are those plates that we're spinning. And we have to try to maintain control of the world around us. That's why we're busy. But in reality, and this might sound harsh, but it's true, that is an expression of selfishness. Rest is hard because we're selfish. We want what we want. We have our mind set on the things that we think are best for us, and we will do what we have to do to get those things. That's an expression of selfishness. But rest is also hard because we lack faith. Rest is hard because of faithlessness. And here's what I mean by that. We don't really trust God to care for the things that we must lay aside when we cease striving. That, sure, I understand God wants me to rest, but I have to keep this going or it will all fall apart. We put ourselves in the place of God, a role that we should never have. So as counterintuitive as it seems, working from rest rather than to it really actually works. It really works. Why does it work? First of all, I can give you a list of 100 things here, honestly, but here's 3, because, it's a sermon, and sermons come in 3s, I guess, right? It strengthens us. Rest strengthens us, and it strengthens us for the work ahead of us. So instead of just thinking about rest as a time for recovery, which it is, but instead of just thinking of, I ran out, I'm completely empty, I'm just running on fumes and I need to refill, what if we began to change our perspective on this and say, no, I start with a full tank, rather than saying, I hope I can make it to the next stop and refill. What if we say, I'm going to start from a position of strength and fullness? See, we head toward our challenges with a full tank, not running on fumes. Time spent resting is what refills us. It reinvigorates those things that are dying in us. So it strengthens us. It replenishes us. Most important, though, I think, is the work that rest does in our souls. We talk about our bodies, right? We talk about how I'm just worn out and I'm tired, I've been working so hard, my body can't take it anymore, whatever. That's often what the context that we think of rest in, that I need it for my body. But what we neglect to our detriment in a major way as Christians is what happens in our souls when we don't rest. Rest works because it liberates us. It frees us from our self-imposed expectations that we have to get everything done and keep everything in order. Again, that is not our job, that is God's job. Rest sets us free and teaches us to trust God, not ourselves. So, if we want to keep first things first, we must learn to rest first, to work from rest, not to rest. Now, let me just say, I can already hear your objections, even though you are not saying anything out loud. And that's because I have had these same objections, right? Matt, you don't understand how busy my life is, and how much work there is, and how much depends on me. You're probably right. I don't understand what it's like in your world. I probably don't understand all of the things that you do have to do, but here's what I do understand and believe with my whole heart, is that God cares about all of that stuff even more than you do, and He is highly qualified, even more qualified than you, to be the Lord over even your life. He can be trusted. So this is not a sermon about, why don't you all just stop working and be lazy for a while? I know that some of you, that's what you hear when I tell you that rest is something that God wants us to do. That you maybe hear me saying, just put everything aside all the time and just kind of sit back and just let nature take its course. No, I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that at all. What I'm saying is that God knows us better than we know ourselves, that God is more qualified to be Lord over our lives than we are, and that God can take care of everything even when we step aside from it. God knows more about farming than you do. How's your toes? God knows more about ranching than you do. He knows more about teaching than you do. He knows more about pastoring than I do. He knows more about parenting than you do. God is supremely qualified to be Lord over your life, and when He says rest, He means it, and He can help you. So, I'm asking you to just try this on with me today. Some of you might be really good at this. Some of you might say, yeah, this is a practice in my life. Set aside a day for rest. Trust it to the Lord. I'm working from this place, and if so, that's great. I am proud of you. Most of us, though, are going, yeah, I don't know. That sounds kind of Old Testament-y and probably doesn't apply to the 21st century world. And I hear what you're saying, but you're wrong. You're just wrong. This works. I can't explain it, but it works, okay? So, seeking first God's kingdom and his righteousness means trusting him to take care of our lives. That's the first thing we need to understand. It's about asking God, it's about trusting God to take care of our lives. So my first question for you today is this. What part of your world is hardest for you to entrust to God so you can rest? What is the thing that you just really don't think God understands or can handle, that you have to hold on to because you're better at it than him? Is it family stuff? Is it work stuff? Is it your operation that you're running? Is it your hobbies? What is it? What is the thing that you struggle to give over to God? There's probably more than one, but what's the thing? What's the one thing that you just think, yeah, I mean, I would rest, but I'm afraid that God doesn't know what he's doing. I've been doing this for a long time, and God might be a beginner. I appreciate that you see the humor in what I'm saying. We all have things that we don't think God can handle. Those are the things that usually prevent us from truly resting. But God can be trusted, and you can rest. And if you can rest, you can learn to work from rest, not toward it. So, in Jesus' time, there was a group of religious leaders called the Pharisees. You've probably heard of these people. If you haven't heard of them, the way I describe them will resonate with you, and you will know somebody like this, I'm sure. So the Pharisees were hard-hearted, strict legalists. They saw themselves as sort of the gatekeepers of God's kingdom, and their responsibility was to keep out all the riffraff, right? We don't want any weirdos in God's kingdom. So they promoted themselves as experts in all things related to God, and they used this to their advantage to oppress and to control people. Now, probably their favorite thing to weaponize against people was the Sabbath. Of all things, the day that God set aside for rest. And the Pharisees took that gift from God and weaponized it against people to control them. Now, God did establish the Sabbath. This is one of the big 10, right? One of the 10 commandments is to honor the Sabbath and keep it holy. Set aside a day of rest and keep it holy. Honor it. And God did set up some rules around it to make sure the people honored it appropriately. But for the Pharisees, God's guidelines were not good enough. So they added some rules. Let me read some of these to you. Some of the rules that the Pharisees had about the Sabbath. And this is from a 2009 sermon by John MacArthur on Mark 2. And he outlined some of the things that the Pharisees, some of the rules they had regarding the Sabbath. Get a load of these. You couldn't travel more than 3,000 feet. It's about 5 blocks or so, right? Some said you can't go more than 1,999 steps. If you take the 2,000th step, you violated the Sabbath. But the only way that you can go further than that is if you put some food 1,999 steps away on the day before the Sabbath. You don't want to do that on the Sabbath. And once you got to the food, then you could take another 1,999 steps to either go further or to come back. One rabbi said that he spent 2.5 years studying to figure out all the minutiae, all the little rules. Things like you could lift something up and put something down, but only from certain places to certain other places. You could lift it up in a public place and put it down in a private place, or maybe you could lift it up in a private place and put it down in a public place. No burden could be carried that weighed more than a dried fig, or half a fig carried 2 times. If you put an olive in your mouth and rejected it because it was bad, you couldn't put a whole one in the next time because the palate had tasted the flavor of the whole olive. your mouth was working, you know. You're not supposed to do that. If you threw an object in the air and caught it with the other hand, that was sin. But if you caught it in the same hand, it wasn't. A tailor couldn't carry his needle. The scribe couldn't carry his pen. A pupil couldn't carry his books. No clothing could be examined, lest somehow you found a louse and inadvertently killed it, which was forbidden. Wool couldn't be dyed. Nothing could be sold. Nothing could be bought. Nothing could be washed. A letter could not be sent. A fire could not be lit. Cold water could be poured on warm, but warm couldn't be poured on cold. An egg could not be cooked, even if all you did was put it in the scorching Israeli desert sand. That was not allowed. You could not bathe for fear that when the water fell off of you, it might accidentally wash the floor, which is work, you know. If a candle was lit, you couldn't put it out. If it wasn't lit, you couldn't light it. Chairs couldn't be moved because they might make a rut. You couldn't look in the mirror, or you might find a white hair and be tempted to pull it out. Some of us, that would be an all-day job, I know. Women couldn't wear jewelry because, of course, jewelry weighs more than a dried fig. A radish couldn't be left in salt because that would pickle it, and pickling is work. No more grain could be pickled than you could fit in a lamb's mouth. I don't know how they determined that. It goes on and on. Laws about wine and honey and milk and spitting and writing and getting dirt off your clothes. You could only use enough ink for 2 letters. Not 2 written letters, 2 alphabet letters. You could have a wad in your ear, but you couldn't put false teeth in your mouth. What was forbidden? Sowing, plowing, reaping, binding sheaves, threshing, winnowing, sifting, grinding, kneading, baking, washing wool, beating wool, dyeing wool, spinning wool, putting on a weaver's beam, making threads, weaving threads, separating threads, making a knot, untying a knot, sewing 2 stitches. On and on and on. You talk about heavy laden. The system was oppressive, and it was all unscriptural, and it was horribly ungodly and brutally unkind. So, you can imagine the outrage of the Pharisees in the story that we are about to read when they witnessed Jesus and his disciples picking some grain and separating it in their hands while they were out walking on, you got it, the Sabbath. The horror, you guys. Okay, so listen to this. This is Mark chapter 2, verses 23 through 28. This is some lessons about rest, okay? There are so many passages we could look at. This one seems just wildly appropriate for our times, okay? One Sabbath, Jesus was going through the grain fields, which was permitted, and as his disciples walked along, they began to pick some heads of grain. This was also permitted. You were allowed to, the roads went like right through the middle of the fields in these days, and people would walk through and they would help themselves to a little bit as they went. This was totally permitted in that culture. And the Pharisees said to him, and my question is, why were they there? They're just waiting for him to mess up, right? So the Pharisees said to him, look, why are they doing what is unlawful on the Sabbath? Unlawful. In other words, why are they not following our traditions? And he answered, have you never read what David did? This is a reference back to King David, hundreds of years before this. Have you ever read what King David did and when he and his companions were hungry and in need? In the days of Abiathar, the high priest, he entered the house of God and ate the consecrated bread, which is lawful only for priests to eat, and he also gave some to his companions. Okay, let me just explain this real quick, not in a lot of detail. But one of the things that God had commanded of his people, of the Israelites, is that on a weekly basis, a fresh set of loaves of bread would be brought into the tabernacle, into the house of God, the temple, as a representative. The loaves of bread represented the presence of God. This was often called was called the bread of presence in the Old Testament sometimes. And this was holy bread. Nobody was supposed to touch it. It wasn't like the communion bread that we share and everybody enjoys. It wasn't like that. This was kind of a display thing. And God said, nobody should eat that. It's a symbol of my presence. Nobody should eat that except the priests. The priests are allowed to eat that, and like they eat the week-old stuff when the fresh batch comes in. And what happened is David and his companions, as David is the king and his mighty men are with him, as they are wandering, his men are growing hungry, and David says, hey, I know where we can find something to eat. And he goes into the temple of God and takes this bread and gives it to his people. So not only do they don't help themselves, the leader says, hey, you guys should have some of this. And then Jesus used that example, and he says, look, your boy David, like the guy who you all look up to, he went into the temple and he ate the holy bread. Like, that was against the biblical law. And yet David was a man after God's own heart, right? They venerated David. They thought he was a big deal. And Jesus said, haven't you ever read what happened there? Like, clearly God cares about people more than about tradition, is the point of what he's saying, okay? So verse 27, and then he said to them, to the Pharisees, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. So the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath. Now, there is so much more to this passage. When Jesus is saying that he is the Lord of the Sabbath, that was him saying, I'm God. Like, I can tell my guys what to do because I made the Sabbath. I am the Lord of the Sabbath. The Sabbath was a gift from God. It was ordained by God. So if Jesus says, hey, I'm the Lord over that, he is saying, I'm God, and they're going to listen to me, not you guys. Okay? They would have picked up on it a lot more than we did. But the phrase I want us to focus on here is this idea that the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. God didn't create the Sabbath as a way to oppress us and then say, let's see them try to keep that. Let's see them try to fit their lives in that thing. Ha! That's not what it was for. The Sabbath was given as a gift for us. Okay, that's the point here. So, as you can see from this passage, I hope, and the insights that I gave you about these Pharisees, there is definitely a wrong way to rest. There's a wrong way to do this, you guys. We can't treat rest just like we treat everything else in our lives, as a means to an end or a process to be controlled. When we rest, we shouldn't make demands of ourselves or others. We should not fixate on details, and we shouldn't sterilize it and micromanage it until it loses its life-giving power. If we treat rest this way, we will never see its value, and if we don't see its value, we will never make it a priority. So one of the reasons people don't rest is that they do it the wrong way. They set up a bunch of rules. Well, okay, if I'm going to rest, I got to do it like this. I can't do this, but I could do that. That's not okay, but this is okay. I could watch this sort of a program, but not that sort of a program. I could watch some sports, but not too much sports, but only certain sports, because that sport's violent or whatever. So just stop. Stop. That's not what the Sabbath is for. It doesn't own you. It's a gift to you. So that's the wrong way to rest. But Jesus' way of rest, the rest that reflects his kingdom and his righteousness, is so different. Just like David leading his men and saying, you know what, we're all very hungry. God will understand this. Jesus' way of rest prioritizes our being over our doing. That who we are is more important than what we do. He cares for us. Yes, he cares about our activities. He has promised to take care of those things, but he cares for us as limited, finite, tired people. When we rest first, we experience the compassion and the grace of Jesus as he carries us for a while. He sees our needs. He invites us to stop. And when we stop, he cares for us. He says, why don't you just let me take that for a while? I got it. I can control this. Just rest. Just breathe. So the Pharisees had made rest a legalistic ritual and tradition. It was one that needed to be painstakingly navigated to keep God happy. But that's not what true rest is. True rest is a gift. It is a gift, you guys. It is not a reward for good work or behavior. It's a blessing. It's not an intrusion or an interruption or a problem to be solved. It's a time of provision when God takes care of our needs. Jesus is the Lord of our rest. He's the Lord of the Sabbath, the day, but also what the Sabbath represents, which is rest and stopping from striving. And as the Lord of the Sabbath, as the Lord over our rest, Jesus says, stop. Cease your striving, seek me, and I'll care for you. And if we will do that, then everything else will come together. Remember, Matthew 6:33, seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things will be added to you. Do that first, and all else will come together. So, how you view the rest that God offers will determine what you do with it. It always does, right? I mentioned this in my midweek video for those of you who watch those, but what we expect is what we experience often, right? So if we expect that the day of rest or that rest is going to be a hassle, we will treat it as such, okay? So I have a question for you then, since how you view this determines what you'll do with it. What's your tendency here? Do you understand rest or view rest as a demand? Oh, I better do it or else. As a reward? Oh, if I just work hard enough, I can get to it and God will be so pleased with me that he'll let me stop. Or do you just see it as a gift? That God says, look, I know you're not done, but I love you. Here you go. How do you understand rest typically? By the way, I've seen it as all three of these things at varying times, and sometimes I see it as all three of these things at the same time. What's your tendency? Do you think God is demanding it of you? Is he holding it out as a reward? You know, the carrot dangling in front of the donkey pulling the cart? Oh, just a little further, a little more. Keep working, you'll get that thing. Or is it just a gift? If you see rest as a demand, you might do it, but only after you've done everything else and you won't be happy about it, right? If you see rest as a reward, you'll never stop until everything is done, which is never. But if you see rest as a gift, you'll accept it humbly. You'll say, God, I don't deserve this, but thank you. You'll learn to enjoy it regularly and value it personally. And it will become a priority, a first thing that you keep first. All right, let's look at one more passage here. There's so many more, like I said, but we'll look at one more here. In our last passage, Jesus defended rest, really, and said it was God's gift to us, that God didn't make man for the Sabbath, but he made the Sabbath for us. So in this passage, we're going to see that the invitation to rest is for everyone. We might have a tendency to think that rest is for other people who don't have so much responsibility on their shoulders, retired people, although many of the retired people that I know are just as busy as those of us who are still working hard. Jesus teaches that God-given rest is for everyone, especially for those who are overwhelmed with life. This is Matthew 11, 28 through 30. Jesus says this. He says, "Come to me, all of you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." Now, the word rest here in this passage, if you go back to the original language this is written in, that word rest is very close to the word salvation. I will give you salvation. This isn't just an invitation for Jesus to say, hey, come and get saved. It is an invitation to rest, the kind of rest that saves us. You understand? He says, take my yoke upon you and learn from me. Okay, what's a yoke? We don't use these things very often anymore, if at all, but I think you know this, you've probably seen this, but a yoke is that wooden piece in between a pair of oxen that holds them together as they work in tandem to pull something, right? That's the yoke. And the phrase, "take my yoke upon you," was a common phrase in that day and age especially for rabbis. When somebody became a follower of or a disciple of a rabbi, they were said to have taken that rabbi's yoke upon them. So this wasn't out of nowhere, like, what is this illustration he's using? This was a common phrase. But what Jesus is saying basically is, when you follow me, if you take my yoke upon you, if you follow me and learn from me, I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. Oh man, see, this is not just about, man, I'm tired, my body's weary. This is about our souls. He says, my yoke is easy and my burden is light. That sounds wonderful. Man, as I read that, I hope that hits the mark. I hope there's a little part of you that goes, oh, that sure sounds nice. Jesus' invitation to rest is for you. If you are weary, you're worn out, basically. If you are burdened, if you're carrying a heavy load. And by the way, that's kind of relative, isn't it? What's a heavy load to one person might not be a heavy load to another person. We've all seen that and experienced that. Sometimes people are deeply burdened by things that we don't really care about, right? So that's pretty relative. But if you are carrying a heavy load, if you are tired, physically tired, if you're out of energy, if you're crushed, if you just can't take another step, that's who Jesus' invitation is for. The invitation is not for those who are limitless, who are highly efficient, who are self-sufficient, who are exemplary in their time management, or in total control of their lives. Those are the words that I like to think describe me. Limitless, efficient, self-sufficient, exemplary in time management, and in control. I would love if those things actually describe me. I like to think they do, but they don't. So I wrote that in my notes to remind myself that this invitation is for me because there's a lot of times I'm really weary, that I am burdened, that I am physically tired, and there's some times where I just need to just stop. This invitation is for me. It is for you. Jesus is inviting you to come to him. He's not demanding that you show up groveling, begging. He's inviting you to come first and foremost. Now, here's the thing. Coming to him requires faith. He is inviting you to take his way of doing things. This requires surrender. You can't take what he is offering and still hold on to your own way of doing things. He's inviting you to learn from him. This requires humility. And he's promising that if you will humbly surrender and put your faith in him, you will find true rest. Not just a quick breather or a little cat nap, but the kind of rest that transforms and rests your very soul. An inside out rest. The kind of rest that you could work from, not have to earn and work to. So in case you think that Jesus is maybe just trying to pull a fast one on you here, trying to dupe you into just another version of busyness, just trying to get you to do his thing, make his agenda work, get this. He says that his way is not like our way. If we will seek him first and prioritize his kingdom and his ways, we will discover that he is gentle and humble, as opposed to the harshness and strife that we are accustomed to. His way of living is easy and light. Well, that doesn't mean that we'll become lazy and good for nothing, okay? It means that he does the heavy lifting so that we can do more than we could ever imagine. But first, we must rest. Jesus is inviting us, come to me, respond to my offer of true rest. And the thing is, the more we trust, the closer we are drawn in, and the more our lives are changed by his gentle, humble way, by his love, by his power. So, where do you find yourself right now when it comes to that invitation from Jesus? At which stage of that invitation are you? Come, take, learn, or find. Do you notice those four things that he said? Come to me, take my yoke upon you, learn from me, and find rest. Are you still hesitating to come to Jesus because you're unsure of what he'll be like? Maybe he'll be just as demanding as the rest of the people in our lives, and we just don't know if we can handle one more disappointment. Maybe you're struggling to take what he's offering. Maybe you've taken that step of trust and you say, okay, God, I'll try this out. And he says, okay, great. Hand over some things to me, but you're struggling to do that. You're struggling to take what Jesus is offering you because you'll have to give up something else to receive it. Maybe you're at the point where you're learning to trust him and follow his commands and his example. Maybe you're at the point where you are learning from him. Remember, this requires a lot of humility. All of this does. We have to set aside what we think we know to learn from Jesus. Maybe, I hope, that you are at the point where you have done that, you've come to Jesus, you've taken what he's offered, you are learning from him, and you have found that true, deep rest for your soul. If we want to keep first things first and make God's priorities our priorities, we must learn to work from our rest, not to our rest, to start from a place of total trust in and dependence on God, knowing that he is fully able to take care of all the things that we lay aside when we seek him first. He can be trusted. We need the intervention that rest provides. We need to be rescued from our addiction to control. Rest is salvation. It is rescue. It is liberation. So first, rest and seek God's kingdom and his righteousness and let him, trust him to take care of everything else. He is highly capable and fully qualified to run your life. Trust him. Lord, this morning, we pray that you would help us to seek you, seek your kingdom, and seek your righteousness. Lord, help us to keep first things first. And among those first things, help us to prioritize rest. Help us to understand that rest is a gift. It is not a demand. It is not a reward. It is not an intrusion. It is a gift. Thank you, God, for knowing us well enough to know that we need to stop. And it's not just so that our bodies can recover, and it's not just so that our minds can recover, Lord. It's for our souls. It's so that we stop striving like everything depends on us. God, you know us so well, and you love us so well, and you care for us so much. We want to learn from you. Help us to learn to work from our rest, not to our rest. Help us to learn to trust you enough to stop, to just receive rest as a gift. Lord, what we really long for is to find rest for our souls. So as we come to you and learn your gentle, humble ways, as we take your yoke upon us, as we become your followers and see that your way is easy and light, help us to learn from you and find that true rest for our souls. That's our prayer this morning. We know that you hear us. We trust that you will do this work in us. Help us to not resist you, but to partner with you and work with you as you transform us. We ask this in Jesus' name.